All right, there we go. Got it set up.
Okay. Great.
So I'm very excited to have you on today. And for those that don't know, this is Peter Gardiner. So you were the former head coach of Denmark, I believe, for 5 years.
That's right, yeah.
And then you were the director of Sportif based out of Scotland.
Yeah, that's my full-time job, has been the last 20 years. In fact, it's 20 years this year. So we're looking forward to that.
20-year anniversary, which is pretty exciting.
On this particular Sportif.
Right. And then on top of that, you also made a video that I know is like one of my coaches up here was one of the first things she purchased when she started to get into coaching was 101 judo games, which you made with Fighting Films in about 2008, I think.
That was a blessing and a curse, that video, actually.
Right.
Because it was a part of the, showing people how they could use games to develop people's judo. But the problem was that I became like the judo games guy.
Right.
Which is cool, but there's other things that I think are more important. So but it was a pretty popular video.
Right. Yeah, understandably. And then also you were the director of coaching for Judo Scotland from 2004 to 2007.
Yeah.
And am I missing anything else? I mean, your resume is pretty extensive.
I worked for British Judo for 4 years as a development director for British Judo. I think that was the first time sort of development officers and the development system came in formally.
Right.
So that was an interesting job, and I learned a lot during that process. It was good.
Right. So I guess the first question that might be a little boring to you, but probably interesting to everyone else is what got you interested in judo or involved in judo at all I'm guessing as a child, as most people come to judo as children?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I started judo, it was my 6th birthday present. Nobody did judo at that time. I mean, it was a very long time ago. And apparently I'd seen it on television and said to my parents, that's what I want to do. I want to do judo. And in Edinburgh at the time where I'm from, there was one Chinese restaurant in the whole of Edinburgh. And we were in the Chinese restaurant. And my parents, nobody knew anything about judo because it was a pretty niche sport at the time.
Right.
But I asked the waiter in the Chinese restaurant,
right,
do you know if there was a judo club? And he said, there's one above this Chinese restaurant.
Huh.
And as it happened, it was George Kerr, who's a 10th Dan, IJF Dan. It was his judo club.
Wow.
So the chances of starting in that club in that way are just unique. And I always think how fortunate it was to walk through the doors of the Edinburgh club at the time when George was in charge. It was amazing.
Right. Yeah. It's a funny thing about judo, I think, that we maybe don't celebrate enough. I mean, obviously that's an incredibly special case of a 10th Dan, which how many of those are there in the world right now? I'm not sure, but the list is short. But as a general rule, when you look at the country that I'm from in Canada, if someone goes to a random dojo, just a dojo in Canada, the likelihood that your coach, no matter what province or wherever you live, the likelihood is that the person that's going to coach you was a competitor at a national championships at minimum. At minimum, right? That's our minimum goal. When you think of other sports, you sign up for soccer. It's probably another kid's dad when you're a little kid that's running that program. And sometimes I think I'm not really sure how we can take advantage of that in some way or how we can celebrate that better. But to think if a 5-year-old starts judo, the person coaching them may have competed internationally, there's a pretty good chance. That's a pretty special thing for our sport, I think.
It is a good selling point. But one of the things I think about, and I've learned this through working, doing a lot of coach development, is that in this country anyway, people get their coaching qualification, which is just a minimum standard to coach safely.
Right.
But I feel that there's not enough time spent on players, coaches themselves, and perhaps the governing bodies, but really giving quality coach development throughout your career, because you've got that qualification and you get dropped into your club, if you like. Mm-hmm. And if your coach had a certain day of working or ethos like George did, then you will probably continue that. And again, so it's left a little bit to the luck of the draw, rather than being organized and proper, ongoing, practical coach development model. That's what I see. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I can understand that. I guess the next phase of that questioning then would be what got you involved in coaching yourself What was like that fire? Were you drawn to it naturally? Like this was something that really excites you that you wanted to do, or did it sort of fall into it at the end of a competitive career?
Absolute luck, incredible luck, to be honest. At the time, when I look back now, George Kerr was a complete visionary. He started the club in Edinburgh in the middle of town, and I don't know how he got the concept, but he started a health club, judo club, a gymnasium. It had never been done before, a business model. And he had another coach. There was somebody called Morris Allen, who I'm still very friendly with today. He lives in the States now, but we speak together every week. Morris is in his 70s now. Morris was the coach there. But when I was 16, I was just going to leave school, and Morris and George, who were partners, Morris decided to move to the States. A job became available in the Edinburgh club, a full-time judo job, which I just literally stepped into from one day to the next. I was a brown belt and I'd never coached before. And we had about 400 kids at the club at that time. It was a big club.
Wow.
So George used to coach. And so the first week he said, "Okay, I'll coach with you." So the first week he was coaching the class and I was shadowing him, if you like. And the next week, or not next week, the next day, because we had it 6 days a week. Judo at the club 6 days a week. The next session, we started the session together and he said, "I'll be right back." And he never came back.
Really?
So it was literally baptism by fire.
Right.
And I had to work out how, so I was coaching as a job professionally from the age of 16. So very few people have got that, amount of coaching at that time. And then, I was also a competitor at that time. And when I was 19, 20, I got quite a bad neck injury, which actually literally from one tournament to the next completely finished my competitive career. So I had a choice to make, to either stop doing judo completely or to really just throw everything into coaching.
Right.
And I think that often the players who don't reach their potential or the potential that they had in their mind's eye don't get to where they want to get. Often they're the best coaches because they've got something to prove, I think, whether they know or not. So I find that a lot. So that's how I stumbled into coaching, and I'm still doing it now. So.
Right. Yeah, I like your idea that they become the best coaches as a person that also feels they fell dramatically short of their career goals as an athlete. I sort of like the idea coming from a similar place, I guess you could say.
It's like I don't know if they even realize it, but I have noticed. I think that some of the really great coaches that I know, like for example, Mark Earl, who was at Camberley, just a fantastic coach, also a great judo player, but missed his Olympic place. There was Kenneth Brown was in the category. He had a really superstar, just one step ahead. He never quite made the step over. But coach. One of the best coaches I've ever met. Incredible coach.
Yeah, and when you look at other professional sports, there's often a correlation with the greatest athletes of all time not being the best in those other roles. When you think of Michael Jordan was unsuccessful in many different ways post athletic career. Wayne Gretzky, very famous Canadian, was a terrible NHL coach. And then you look at baseball as an example, or American football. Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest NFL coach of all time, didn't play in the NFL. Or you look at in baseball, so many of the managerial positions throughout baseball are by backup catchers, guys that might have made the major leagues, but they were the backup catcher. So they have a great understanding for the game. But yeah, I agree. Like there's a competitive fire in me as a coach that maybe would have been extinguished had I got to the goals that I had hoped to. And that really motivates me for sure.
So I think that's I could say the same. People like Klopp, the Liverpool manager, who's incredible. I love to look at other coaches in other sports and what they do and try to learn from those guys. So Ferguson in football, those types of guys that create special teams. And when they leave, the team goes under because they were the glue that held that team together. So I think you can learn a lot by looking at other sports and other coaches.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So to more specific, I guess, your programs and what you're doing. So approximately how many total students, judoka, do you have in the Sportif program, and about how many clubs or dojos are you looking at? the totality of everything?
Well, at the moment, we're probably sitting about just over 700 students.
Right.
But pre-COVID, we were more than that. So we didn't actually lose a lot of people during COVID, but we decided not to open some clubs when we came back. So we're sitting about 700, but it's grown at the moment. It's actually grown as much as we wanted to go. We could be much busier if we wanted to be.
Right.
And full-time coaches, there's myself and Preeti, who's my wife. She's a brilliant coach. John Buchanan, who was a former world medalist, bronze medalist. Right. And actually his wife, Claire, who's also a European medalist at Judo. So these are the 4 full-time coaches now.
Right.
So they're a really good core coaching staff. And then on top of that, we've got 7 part-time or assistant coaches, support coaches, let's say. Right. And again, we're really, really lucky. 2 of the main coaches, Abby Blackie, who's a ex-British team member and ex-internationalist, who started at Sportif, back to Sportif again. So she's one of the coaches.
Right.
Jenny Bryan, who's a Commonwealth silver medalist, national tournament medalist. She's got her own gym and business now. She also, from Sportif, started as a beginner, is also one of the coaches. So everybody that's involved in the coaching program has been a part of Sportif either as a player or very long term. So they understand, what the system is. So we're really lucky with that.
Right. Yeah, that gives you a big leg up in that there's still going to be education for those coaches, but they have an understanding of what that model comes from having been on the other side of learning from it as well.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So and the younger coaches, we've got some really good younger coaches coming through as well. And those guys are British champions or that kind of level as well. And when they're coaching, nobody coaches on their own. They're always coaching with a mentor coach all the time. So they'll be taking parts of the session, but there'll always be somebody there giving them feedback. What about this? What about that?
Right.
They're already, as we said, in the system. So it doesn't take much to, when they're coaching, you can hear your own words being said back to you because they've been in it since 5, some of them. So so we're really fortunate we are with our coaching team. I mean, we've got a really good team. I'm proud of the team. It's great.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I've never thought of it as a script because I don't script things when I'm coaching, but there's certain things that you say or do on a regular basis. So for instance, when I teach kids judo, young children, I mean, I do this for many years, but whenever I teach judo, a big motivation for me is teaching them how to fall. So I have sort of a script that I play or say every time, which is what's the most important part of judo? And the kids say yukeme. And what's the most important part of it? Yukeme, protecting your head. So it's a funny thing because you say that, I say that almost every class. So then when you hear someone else say it and you sort of hear exactly like you said, your words from someone else. And it's just like, it's an easy thing to say that people can remember and it gives it a sticking point. So yeah, I can totally see that.
This thing is really important when you're coaching young children, and that it goes through. You understand that in these formative years between, let's say, the age of 5 and maybe 14, you're hardwiring people's everything that they do. What you do now, that foundation that you put in, is everything. If they, whatever level they're going to achieve within the sport, if they want to go down the performance route, the stuff that you do when you're coaching, the way you hardwire them, that's the make or break for kids. That's my experience. Yeah.
Right.
Our job in the club is to make everybody the best that they can be, and to whatever their goal is, to try and make them good at that and to make them have a really positive experience. But for the players who want to do performance judo, our job is to make them really good kids, hard working, positive attitude, and really good solid skills, good skill level, so that when we hand them on to the performance program, performance coaches get a really good product to start with.
Right.
So we're clear on what our goal is in the club in terms of choosing players.
Yeah. So I guess my question would be in terms of coaching is the specifics of how you develop a coach, because obviously you have a long history of doing so. So you were saying the developing coaches, they're on the mats, but so one of the full-time, I'm guessing. So one of the full-time coaches is on the mats, one of the 4 of you with an apprentice, if you want to say, that's on the mats, that they lend them the reins periodically is part of it.
Yeah. So I don't know. Again, I don't know how I got to this, but when I started judo coaching for George when I was 16, on the first couple of days I went, maybe my memory's not very good, I was teaching a lot of classes. I got a big book and I started writing my session plans down from then. And I've got all the session plans I've ever done. I don't think I could coach if I didn't have a session plan.
Right.
So before the session, whoever the apprentice coaches, if you like to call them that, we'll sit down together and we will look at the session plan. We'll go through it. We'll say, you know, which part are you doing? Which part am I doing? And it'll work like that. So they'll be briefed. They know exactly what they're doing so that they're not getting dropped in.
Right.
And then on that, you know, there might be, we've got this thing called positive contact. And this is, you've got to have a positive contact with every player on the mat. You need, you know, so, and you might have some kids that are normally quite badly behaved at school, let's say. And all they ever get is a bit of a hard time. So we want to try and turn that round. At some point in the class, we say something positive to them. So they start going, but now, somebody said something good about me. And the more they do things well, the more they get that positive reinforcement.
Right.
And it's very real. It's not like PC, you know, trying to, no, they have to do something good to be given that feedback. So it's that type of thing. And I will go around and I will say to, let's say it's Ryan, one of our great coach. I'll say, Ryan, have you spoken to everybody today? Have you spoken to, yeah, I've spoken to everybody. So he knows he's speaking to everybody on that mat. So it's that type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's great. My experience, my work experience outside of just coaching is that I worked at a school for kids with autism for 3 years. And so there's obviously a lot of behavior that you're trying to change to make their life easier and the life of the family easier and to help them grow. And one thing we used to do on a regular basis, when you know a child has a history of a lot of disruptive behavior, maybe it's only for themselves, is waiting for an opportunity, preparing for the opportunity for that child to do something that you ask, or for them to do something that was appropriate, or for them to do something special. Could be any of those. And the moment that they do it, be ready. So for instance, I have a child who's disruptive during the judo class. I use it, it obviously translates to judo. So there's one child that is often disruptive during class. So ignore the disruptive behavior, And the moment that he does something great, he does a really good break fall that he hasn't done, immediately hit him with praise. So now everyone's attention seeking and giving him the attention at the appropriate time, and doing that on a pretty regular basis, I find can help mold or manipulate that behavior towards working towards you, rather than them just getting that attention for being scolded or whatever that might be. Yeah.
Exactly. I think the thing that I enjoy about judo is the connection that I have with people. So I want to have a connection with a kid who's 5, and I want to have a connection with an adult who's 65 and he's doing judo recreationally. That is the thing that I find interesting, and I also think that's the thing that gives you the retention that you need to keep your clubs. You know, that people will come to judo because they like you as a coach. So that's a really important factor.
Right.
And people, and kids especially, they know if you have a genuine interest in them, or it's just something that a job that you're going through. So it's easy for me because I really like working with people.
Right.
But if that's not in your nature, I think as a coach, you can, if you like, put a mask on when you go on the mat. And, you know, when you're off the mat, you behave like this. But when you go on the mat, you realize the things you have to do to make that a really good class. So it takes I think there's a lot of thought goes into it, more than people would realize. But that even if you're not that person who can make that natural contact, you find a mechanism to do it as a part of doing your job.
Right. Yeah, it's a performance in a sense.
It is 100%.
Right.
You're driving up in the car and you're exhausted. You jump on the mat and you're like, guys, let's go. That's it.
Right.
You can't have a bad day. It's not
right.
It's a bad day.
Yeah, and the other thing that I find about that is you do that long enough where you change, or whatever it might be, you put that performance on. Absolutely. And you provide that energy. And what I found too is once you get in the groove, or you've done it a long time, obviously you have a humongous amount of experience. I've been coaching a long time, but not quite as long as yourself. I find that too, is once you get into, and you've done that for a long time, when you step in and you feel that energy of the kids from that expectation, it gives you that energy to do it. It doesn't feel like work to put that mask on or perform that way, because they're ready for it too. So they come to you excited, like, hey, we're going to do it. And that energy.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And I think you're only as good as your last class. I really do.
Right.
We have a good program. But one of the key things about the program is that we're always looking at ways to make it better. I mean, always.
Right.
And if sometimes you'll deliver a really good class and you'll leave and you're feeling really good about that. But I've seen me have periods of maybe months where I know those classes are just not right. And I'm really bothered about it. In the same way, if you were a performance player and sometimes you go through dips, it just doesn't work for whatever reason. But you keep going and you keep working it and tweaking it to try and make it the best that you can be.
Right.
I've understood what it's like to be a player who wants to make it, and the drive that it comes to want to be the best.
Right.
Whatever it is, let's say the Olympic Games was it. I think you have to have the exact same motivation and mindset as a coach to be the best that you can be, a world-class coach. You don't get it for nothing. You have to really put the effort in. And I think that is the one thing that we've got in Sportif. And all the other coaches are really good, so they're competitive as coaches to be the best you can be. And it has to come from you, and you can't have a bad day. You have to be on it. On a Friday, we teach 140 people back to back in 7 classes.
Right.
The first group that comes on is 5-year-olds. And it goes from 5-year-olds right up to guys in their 60s, tangris.
Right.
And it goes right through people, really good players in the British team, people who win medals in European A tournaments. But each class doesn't know that we did a class before that. They don't care.
Right.
Class number 5 wants the same energy as class number 1 got. And so does class number 7. And you have to keep that. When we finish on a Friday night, it's 6 hours straight. We come off the mat on a Friday. We're tired, but the energy level is really high all the time.
Yeah, and I think that self-criticism, or whatever you want to say, self-analysis, that's a better reference, is a really great thing to prevent that loss of energy, because like anything else, if you don't look at it with a critical eye of what you can do better, then it can easily go through, you're just a person stamping the envelope, and then that's when it becomes stale. But when you look at it and you genuinely want to get better, just like the athlete or former athlete, it allows you to look at it more that way. So that provides energy, because when you're constantly thinking, we could get better at this, we can get better at this, then that gives you the energy to keep going every day, because it becomes a little bit of a Groundhog Day if that's not the case. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we always have different kind of strap lines, and the strap line we've had this year is, as a competitive club, we do really well, and we've got people in the British team, and we've got all of that stuff, right? So, but the strap line that I've started to put in this year, since it's the 20th year of this particular program, the strap line is, we're just getting started,
right?
And that is the thing for everybody. No, we're just getting started. We've got an under-20s girl just now who's winning some tournaments in Europe. She's really good, and so we'll have a chat after the tournament, and we'll finish it, and she'll just say, "I'm just getting started."
Right.
So that's the whole thing. We're just getting started constantly. It's good.
Yeah. It's like having a youthful enthusiasm or energy, and just trying to carry that year over year, like finding those little tricks to do it.
Well, it's funny because I knew we were going to chat today, so I looked at this year. Well, now I've been coaching for 46 years, actually as a job, right?
Right.
And I'm as motivated now as I've ever been.
Right.
I am really on it. Want to do better. Want to develop this part of the club. Want to improve that part of the club. The clock's ticking for me, and I mean, in a couple of years, I would like to take it quite a bit easier. But until I get to that point, I will still be involved, but not in the way that I am at the moment. But people are sick of me, with programs and what's next.
Right.
But that, keeping yourself motivated and having challenges within your coaching is, well, for me anyway, that's what makes it interesting.
Right. Yeah. I can see that. and you can see the thing that I appreciate, that is obviously aware, and anyone that's watching would be aware, is the enthusiasm is so clearly still there. And so it's nice to see that. For instance, a similar example is when I commentated the Olympics last summer. There was a gentleman who had just recently retired. He commentated. He was the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs for like Hockey Night in Canada for something like 25 years. And he called a rowing gold medal for Canada. And he came into the room after the sort of lounge for the commentators. He came into the room literally glowing. And it was so amazing to see this gentleman. I believe he's 72 years old. And he was as excited as a 17-year-old. That's, like and so that's just such a nice thing to see when you've done something for so long, to still get that excited about it is really.
The thing is, I think that people think, people assume that I'm some kind of judo junkie guy. I'm absolutely not. If you come into our house, there's not one single thing to do with judo in the house. You would never know anybody does judo here. I don't talk to people about judo very much unless I'm at my work.
Right.
I'm actually coaching and I have to do this part of the job. But generally, outside judo, I don't talk about it. And there's only a few people that I will actually discuss judo with, because I want to get away from it. So it's not as if it's like, he's just judo mad, that guy. I'm not.
Right.
I do want to do my job really well, and I do like the people that I work with. The kids and the parents and the coaches they're really great folks. So it is that. I'm not like 24/7 thinking about judo, because I'm not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think to the same point, I think that's something that can be problematic, actually. So I've seen this with other athletes, and I experienced this myself, is when you don't allow yourself the removal from the thing that you're doing. Especially athletes, I find, do this when athletes, not saying they shouldn't, but if an athlete is either done school or they're not in post-secondary or whatever, and they become, judo takes on the totality of their thought process, you can see sleeping behaviors change. This episode is brought to you by Mattify, which produces beautiful yoga mats like my favorite one right here with the cork surfaces. I do yoga myself, and I'm a huge fan of these mats. They ship anywhere in Canada, and you can even have a discount if you use the promo code A Fighting Chance at checkout. Check them out. So the next thing that I was interested about was what would you say, having done it for so long, what type of percentage of your judoka become competitive or interested in becoming competitive athletes?
Well, a lot in our club. I've got the stats for that. In Great Britain, about 5% of the membership take part in competitions.
Right.
In our club, about 20% or a little bit more take part in competitions. So it's funny because we talked earlier about the Judo Games DVD. It's really important to keep people motivated, and depending on the age of the player. So if a kid's, let's say 5, we might do 60% judo and 40%, not games for the sake of games, very, very judo specific games, completely relative to judo. Not that's really key. And as they get older, less and less and less games, right? Because for me, in the end, the buzz has to be judo. I mean, judo is a fantastic product to sell, and people have to get a buzz out of being skillful at judo and enjoying playing judo. If you focus on just doing games right through, and they never get the thrill of doing judo, by the time they become 12, they leave. They've done it. They've played kids games. So there's a big emphasis in the club about being skillful. And the next thing is, so if you're skillful, then I want to encourage them to become competitive. And we have a very good system in the club. We have they're called skill tournaments. So the club level tournaments, and we've got a lot of people to come to the club tournaments, and we'll also invite clubs that we know are the same kind of ethos as us. And it's a very soft start to tournament. Our older cadets and juniors referee, it's a really nice setup. It looks great. They will encourage people to turn in for throws. They will make kids take a specific grip. They will really encourage judo.
Right.
We'll make the pools up in such a way that they're very, very balanced, so nobody gets smashed.
Right.
It's such a nice introduction to judo. And as they go through that process, then slowly they'll go into lower level regional tournaments. So So they're going to win or almost win all of the time, because we always put them in just at the right level. They're never out their comfort zone, and their confidence just grows and grows.
Right.
I mean, I'm not big on winning. I just don't want to lose. Right? That's the thing for me. But in terms of competitive group, between John and I at the Scottish Championships, we will put in 120 players. It's massive. It's like
that's incredible.
It's 120 players, and nobody will be out of their depth. And I mean, we've been the top club, and this is not a big thing for me, but the facts are that we've been the top club in the country for 15 years straight.
Right.
You know, and we're really far ahead of that. And the reason we are is because we are really committed to skill, and our kids can throw, or they can turn people over. So that's the reason that we're successful. It's not because we do anything magic. We just teach them really good, basic, skillful judo. And the result is that. The focus is to work hard and be skillful, and the side effect is you will win. There's never a discussion about winning ever in the club, ever.
Right. The thing that's interesting to me when you talk about the game situation is there's a idea that I have in my head in terms of how I think about it in that way. And so what I think about is I fell in love with judo, as I'm sure you fell in love with judo, which is part of the reason that you're still involved, obviously, is a huge part of what I love about coaching, again, isn't really the judo aspect. It's the social aspect. It's watching and helping people grow. Judo is sort of the vehicle towards that. But what I think about in terms of judo is sometimes, and I'm not saying this is a wrong, anything anyone can do to keep people engaged in judo and they have their model, that's fantastic. I'm super supportive. But for me personally, what I think is, you know, when you think about basketball or soccer or hockey or name the sport, rugby, the game is the game, right? So like you want to play soccer at the end of that practice. You want to play the game. That's the motivation, because the game is soccer. And I think our game is judo. And sometimes maybe it's a disservice to ourselves or makes our job harder when we think the game is something else. We want them to fall in love with judo. So how do we make the judo part the game? That's what we want, is we want them to fall in love with that part. And so I sort of think, how can I make sure that I keep them engaged and excited, that they want to do the judo part? That's the buy-in, is like, we do these skills development, but at the end, you know what your goal is? You know what the game is? It's not something else. The goal is that you're excited to do randori, right? Yeah. And so that's sort of one of the things I think. And the second part that you mentioned that was really interesting to me is there's a book I've read on and off, and I've been picking through it again, called Top Dog. And it talks about, and this is also an interesting correlation, I think, between Scotland and Canada, where we're not super dense populations all over, is there were some studies done on SAT scores in the United States. So people going into university, and many of the states with the highest SAT scores were people from low population dense regions. So when people go into a huge gym to write their SATs compared to a small gym, a smaller community, the average test scores in the smaller community are much higher, because they're not sitting in a gym with 1,000 people. They're in there with 40. And so one thing that I've thought about and where this goes to is, they say when people feel like they cannot compete, when they're out of their league, they give up and they don't put in effort. But when people think they have a chance, the effort levels and how they score in different ways is actually much higher. So if you want to keep as many people as competitive as possible, and moreover, help them grow as much as possible, keeping them with people that are competitive with them, they don't have to win, but as long as they think there's a chance they could win, will keep them motivated. Whereas if you put a couple superstars with a couple kids that can't perform, those kids that can't perform give up. They don't even put in effort. So that's a really powerful tool, I think.
When I worked in Denmark, worked there for 5 years, that was a great experience for me. I personally learned a lot. I had a great connection with the players there. Still have an amazing connection with them. But when we first went there, the interview process was brilliant. The interview process was done over a weekend, and they actually had to take the national team. So you were taking squad training that weekend, and in between each one, they brought you in, they interviewed you, what you did in the session. But it was really thorough process. So I did a presentation to them, and I'd done a lot of stats. Denmark's a small judo nation, and I said to them, the thing you need to create here is the winning habit. I looked at the matches you're going to; they're just too difficult for you. Right. It's exactly we just said just now, people that are losing matches, we need to start really slow. We need to get that winning habit. Forget going to the Paris tournament. We need to go to, if you like, bigger club tournaments throughout Europe first. Win some medals, get used to winning medals, get in the habit of winning, start to go and expect to win medals. And that expectation of doing well or expectation of winning, well, that's any performance player. Doesn't matter how good they are. Once they get out of that winning habit and the confidence dips, it's so difficult to get out of that.
Right.
It's so difficult. So that it's the exact same as you're saying. That winning habit is really, really important, I think, for any age group moving forward.
Right. Yeah. I think confidence comes naturally to humans, like small children believe that they're going to walk, and you think of how challenging that is, and you think of them doing it over and over and over, but they believe they're going to do it. We naturally are confident. We lose confidence and it's hard to rebuild. So to me, it's like that slow process of building confidence can be a very powerful tool, because helping them build that and helping them believe that until they reach that, and pushing people too quickly for giant leaps in expectation of performance, it can be, psychologically, it can be just brutalizing.
Yeah. A great story about, how important confidence is. John started judo with me when he was 8, right? And we worked together. It doesn't work for me, we work together now. And our contact throughout his entire life has been very, very close. So when he was 16, I organised for him to go to Camberley to work with Mark Earl, right? He hadn't even hit puberty. He was away on the bus down there. He was about 50 kilograms or something. Anyway, he was in Camberley. It was a brilliant training atmosphere. A lot of really world-class players winning European and world medals there. But by the time he was 23, he hadn't really won anything. And Mark Earl, who said to him, "Look, John, you should stop, because this isn't going to happen for you." So he was thinking of stopping, and he went to scuba for 4 months just to train. He came back and he fought in the German Open at that time, one of the top tournaments in Europe, and he got in the final. Like, from winning nothing to get in the final, he lost it. And a couple of weeks later, he went to the British Open and he won it. This is like a guy who's not winning, suddenly winning. Then the guy who was number one in the team at that time retires just before the Birmingham World Championships. John gets the fight. He loses to Pulio on a coca in the quarters, and Pulio throws the Japanese player for Ippon in the final, and he loses just his fight for the bronze. And suddenly he's went from somebody who was going to stop within a year to knocking on the door at world medal, and 2 years later he's a world bronze medalist. So you won't get a better story of, he had all the skills, he had all the stuff, he just didn't have that confidence, and when he had it, he was gone.
Yeah, success begets more success, right?
It is. Yeah. And you shouldn't. That's one of the things that I've learned. There's been many Sportif was in 2 halves. When I came back from Denmark, I started, if you like, Sportif Part 2. Before I went to Denmark, I had Sportif then as well. And in one of the classes was Jenny Bryan, who was a European medalist, Commonwealth medalist. Same class, Ewan Burton, double world medalist, won the Tokyo Grand Slam and everything else. And John Buchanan, world bronze medalist, in the same class.
Right, incredible.
20 kids, 3 of them are world-class players.
Right.
And if I look at each of those players, you and John or Jenny, none of them are superstars. We've got kids in our program now with way more potential than they had at that age. So it's just time. Not everybody gets through, but if you have the right coaching environment, the right coaches behind you, and you're prepared to put the time in. I mean, Ewan Burton is the biggest success story ever. It's incredible.
Right. Yeah. And now the head coach of Scotland now, correct?
Yeah, and what is amazing, and I've known Ewan since he was 6. I tied his belt the first day he came on the mat.
Right.
Today, this girl that I have, Hannah Woods, who's probably going to go to the Commonwealth Games, she's doing really, really well. She's under 20. I was on the phone to Ewan this morning, the 2 of us having a laugh about life and what is going to happen with Hannah, who's in his program, but I'm still a personal coach. So together, you and I are discussing how it's going to work. He's been through my system, so he knows it extremely well. And the dialogue is so positive and flexible, and that's all the stuff that you've been coaching for 46 years. That's the payback. You need a bit payback. It's good.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I'm curious about is to people that don't necessarily follow the international scene, the British judo programs in general, going back to gentlemen like Neil Adams, has always been, and John Buchanan is another great example of a really strong base in Newaza, like spectacular Newaza. Some of the best Newaza ever has come out from Britain. And so the one question I have is, in terms of developing kids at a young age, is do you start, I guess just sort of curiosity, do you start with like a more of a Newaza approach to help build people into doing judo, and then that trickles over to eventually them specializing in Newaza? Or do you start with a large amount of Tachiwaza? Like, do you have a breakdown exactly of how you get kids involved in judo, in terms of from the very beginning? If I was a 5-year-old walking into the dojo, would I see a lot of Newaza, a lot of break falls, a mixture? What?
Oh, the first thing is that when they come into the dojo for the first time, within 1 minute of bowing, very quick introduction. This is Peter. These are the coaches.
Right.
A little bit. This is Mati. This is Hajime.
Right.
Within 1 minute, everybody is active. They are busy immediately. There's not a lot of talking. There's right down to it.
Right.
A lot of coming into the club at first. Contact's a big deal for them. So we have these very simple contact warm-ups that break down the contact barriers within 5 minutes.
Right.
Then we go into a little bit break falls, but not a long time. Don't want to bore them, keep them active. And then one of the things we start right away from kids in a long time is to grip. You often go into a club, you'll see one person's throwing, the other person's got their hands at the side. Right. So they automatically grip. So we have games to do with gripping, a lot of gripping games and stuff like that. Right. And then we'll do a throw on the first day and a hold down on the first day. And they'll do a throw and a hold down every single time they come to judo, right from day. And then that, of course, builds up to specific techniques. But lots of action, very safe, nobody gets a bump. Not lots of time spent on break falls, but just a slow introduction to it. The way that we do the throws, they're all broken down so they can learn to break fall off the throws. The very specific model for teaching. Lots of action, lots of interaction. Right.
Yeah. And then in terms of at that young age, I guess, so to that, back to our conversation about games, judo specific games, randori. So before you have kids doing randori, what would be your, what's the word I want to use? What's the carrot at the end of class for you? What's the game that often becomes the end? Would it be Newaza randori, or one that we play is like, we call it British Bulldog, which is pretty much Newaza. That's one that we often do at the end. They're working on those Newaza skills. They're trying to get away from it. So what would you say early on is your carrot at the end of the class that's that fun game that's judo specific? Is it judo?
It's judo.
Right.
At the end of the class, 90% of the time, it will always be randori. It will be the last thing that we'll do. We write a session plan, but you're reading the class. Sometimes you can do too much judo, and you've got to say, that's too much. Right. Let's play a game. This is the time to introduce a game. Right. In our talent program, we've got three levels: rookies, academy, and squad. I was working with the rookies in the academy yesterday, right? And we did a lot of judo, and normally we'd finish off with a lot of randori. And I just said, no, I've done too much judo. Right. They are, you've got to push them, but it's too much. And then we just played 10 minutes of sumo wrestling, which they have never done before. It was like Christmas. They absolutely appreciate it. So as a one-off, but the reason for that was because the class was flat and I had to reignite it. But it will always be randori. And normally, pretty quickly in the class, we will do full contest randori, not tachiwaza and newaza. We will do newaza on its own to practice newaza. But when we come to randori, then we'll do tachiwaza and newaza, so that they immediately have it from day one of doing standard work and groundwork. It's not two separate things. Right. The other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing about our club is that every single person in the club is left-handed. Everybody fights left-handed from the day they come to. And I made that decision about 10 years ago. Right. It's an old stat. There's more lefties win than righties. So just start as left-handed. So you go 700 left-handed. It's a great advantage.
Right. Yeah. As a funny thing is, as a left-handed judoka myself, the thing that's very interesting about that is, number one, I'm not saying my success, but when you look internationally, you see a lefty on the podium every time, and you look at the percentages, and it's something like, I forget the exact number, but something like 72, 28%, something like that. International competitors, it's somewhere in that 70% range is right-handed. So 1 out of 3 being on the podium as a lefty they're hitting above their weight, right?
Actually, it's about 50-50 who actually win medals. I mean, the advantage left is huge.
Right. And the one real challenge that I've seen, and I've seen my students have, is when someone is left-handed. My best way to describe it is, imagine you're in a dojo with 10 people and 2 are left-handed. So the lefty is going to be so confident against righties because 8 out of 8 of his partners are right-handed. So he's super comfortable. The righties aren't necessarily that comfortable because only 2 out of there are lefty, but they only have 1 lefty to work with, right? So the real challenge, which makes this a very interesting thing, having so many lefties, is left on left is so rare. So lefties against lefties is the most rare. So that's the most awkward. When you see, if you want to watch ugly judo, 2 people that aren't spectacular, just decent judoka that are left-handed against each other, that's where you're going to see very little judo, because both of them are like, I don't even know what to do. So when you have so many people that are left-handed, it's interesting because they're going to get so much experience against lefties, which is normally so rare. So that's very interesting for the development of a left-handed judoka.
It's so the most obvious thing in the world to me. I don't know why much more people don't do it, right? So you imagine when we put kids into tournaments that they're fighting a righty, as long as they've got the lapel on the inside against the righty, righties not had that experience. They don't know to be inside.
Right.
Just go inside and just do tai toshi. If you're an 8-year-old kid, I mean,
right.
This is have a decent piece of name with it.
Right.
But last week, Hannah, I don't know if you'd say this now. Hannah was was in fighting in Paris last week, and the girl who's the world champion in her weight category, the French girl, was fighting, who's also a lefty, right?
Right.
So they were practicing. Was practicing last week there, and I was asking how did the practice go. She went, well, she was a lefty. So Hannah fights lefties every single day.
Right.
So fights a lefty, it's just another lefty.
Right.
But I know that the French girl won't be fighting as many lefties. So I said, how do you feel? She just said she just felt like a strong lefty.
Right. Right. And as if someone is not left-handed, or they haven't had much experience, or maybe their dojo is full of right-handed judoka, they may not understand this challenge. Like, as someone that doesn't know that, what I try to explain to my athletes is, when you're left-handed or right-handed, it doesn't matter. Judo against someone right-handed against judo someone who's left-handed is a different game. Just think of it like a different game. If you think you're going to do judo the same way against a righty as you do a lefty, you're in for a lot of trouble. One of the 2 of them is going to punish you. You have to understand the differences of the challenges, the gripping, the stance, the techniques that are accessible and not accessible. It's very different, and it's somewhat funny to me if you watch tennis, when you go, oh, they're left-handed, and that affects a tennis player. I don't know how far it is, 100 feet to the other side of the court. They're left-handed. Okay, well, they're 100 feet away. We're literally attached to the other person that's that, or boxing is a good reference. When someone's a southpaw in boxing, it's a very different game. And so people that don't have that experience, they've only done judo with people that are right-handed or whatever, it's totally different. You really have to treat it that way.
What we do is, when we do technique work, Uke has to grip right.
Right.
So they get
easy.
Yeah, so this is how it is to go in against righties.
Right.
Go to randori, they've got to fight left.
Right.
So, and then all our gripping drills are almost all of them are left against right. Right. So they're used to dealing with righties grips, but they fight each other every day, which is lefties. They get used to fighting left or right grips. So they don't have to spend any time doing that.
Right.
I mean, is that not the most obvious advantage in the world? I don't know why people would do that.
Right. You got to get comfortable with it one way or the other, right? You got to.
First day as a 5-year-old, and somebody says grip like this, you don't know anything else. So both are grip. It's all about it. They don't turn that way, turn that way. Okay.
Right. Yeah, it sort of goes to my thought too on, for instance, one thing that I often think about is, and I'm sure you've had this experience. So when you teach technique. I mean, some techniques are obviously more complex. Uchimata is a complex technique. You're standing on one foot. There's a hip. That's a more complicated technique. But for instance, an Ippon Seoinage is not the most complicated throw. You turn your back to someone, you lift them up, you throw them. And I think sometimes we sort of overcomplicate what we think of a difficult technique. So one light bulb moment for me is my older son was 2 when I taught him Ippon Seoinage. And at 2, he turned in and it looked pretty good. Where I think we stumble, and this goes to the point of left-handed, is the technique's quality is dramatically affected by its accessibility to get to that technique. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the throw, but what happened 3 seconds before? So when I have athletes that watch judo, I say, don't just watch the throw. What happened for the 5-second lead in? Did someone remove that grip? Did they have the movement the correct way? I think that part, because you can look at people and everyone can have a beautiful seoinage, but why does this person do it so spectacularly and that person not? And I think a lot of it is that what led to the moment of the attack. And so what I'm interested in, this is obviously an example, is having so many lefties, but how much you focus on or what you do, without giving away, trade secrets, what you may do that you make that adjustment so that they can make the throws accessible, because we know that they're going to be able to throw.
I think that there's 2 questions here. First of all, we'll say to everybody, the first thing is to know how to do the throw.
Yep.
The thing to know is when to do the throw.
Right.
The how to do it and the when to do it. That's everything. And that's about the feeling of your partner's posture or your partner's movement.
Right.
And the throw starts before you take a grip. The throw starts when the referee says, a Jimmy, you bow, you come forward to take a grip. Because without that grip that you need to execute that throw, you can't throw them. So right. The first part where you actually set in and get the grip you're looking for. Right. And then movement. And then there's the when you put that attack in. What we're right. focusing on, I'm changing my opinions on judo all the time. The thoughts that I've got now are probably changed from a year ago. I'm constantly looking at, I've discussed it before, about how it can be better, how we can make it work. So we've got 4 systems in the club. We've got throws of a lapel grip, throws of a shoulder grip, throws of 2 sleeves, and throws of a side body grip. So we've got a series of throws, probably about 5 throws in each of those 4 things. That's 20 throws, right? They apply those, they use a different system against a different opponent. So if, for example, the opponent's shorter, they're probably going to go side body or they're going to go shoulder grip. If the opponent's taller, they're probably going to go double sleeves or lapel. And it's about finding the time to drill those particular techniques into them and use the systems. So we've got a thing in the club about not coaching from the mat edge in a contest. Right. Once they get to deck, we'll have a coach in the chair, but in general, that coach doesn't say much.
Right.
We want the players to work things out for themselves. But occasionally they might say stuff like, okay, go side body now. And then when they go side body, then the things there. But 4 fighting systems that they can apply against different opponents.
Right. Perfect. Okay, so my timer's about to go off one more time before I do probably the last session. So it's like it goes off. My timer's going to go off in 42 seconds. So rather than have that awkward time that hits us, I'm just going to take a second. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, we're talking about Newaza. Hannah's just came back. She just fought 3 A tournaments back to back. In the first one, she won 4 matches by Ippon on the ground. The second one, she won 3 Ippons on the ground. And this one, she got lost in the second round. She won by Ippon, and she strangled in the final of Poland. She strangled the Israeli unconscious, and the first year she strangled the French girl unconscious. Right. Newaza is really, really.
Yeah, I'm such an advocate for it. I think perfect. My timers will go off in a sec. To that point, it's funny. There's 2 things you may not remember because I just brought one athlete that one time, but my student Solomon Charon, when I brought him over to Scotland, he lost in the final, I think, at your tournament. And yeah, I think he won all of his matches on the ground, juji and the rolling choke. And then when I commentated, although my one biggest takeaway from commentating the Olympics, where I watch women's judo, but I commentated more of the women's side than the men's side, and I was doing 8 hours a day. Women's base of Newaza is far superior to men. Far superior. It's not even close. The average woman has very strong newaza. The average man doesn't even, you have specialists and then you have everyone else. In women, you have this standard that's way up here. And I noticed that, like, I knew that was the case, but it really stood out. Like, I love an athlete like Monk Bat, and it really stood out to me.
Yeah, but even the what's great about the Japanese women's judo is that the newaza is it's turnovers. It's not anything fancy. It's literally really solid weight on your partner, keyhole down. Really lovely.
It doesn't have to be spectacular. It doesn't have to be spinning heel kicks, you know, equivalent. It's just the basic stuff drilled.
Yeah, solid. Yeah.
Oh, I've got one, because this is something I think about quite a bit. It started in a funny case. So I had a student who, he was 55 years old, and he hadn't done judo since he was a kid. He did judo for a couple of years as a kid. He got re-involved in judo for his children. At one point, his children left, and he kept doing judo, which was pretty interesting. And one point, he asked me how to deal with stiff arms. And I think, as an example, it's something that happens to every child. You have the person stiff arming, and they attempt osoto, and then they get buried. And I said, you know, it's a funny thing as a competitor. One day it's just dealt with.
That's true.
It just goes away. It just goes away. So no one ever taught me how to deal with it, because one day you get to 16 and you're like, you don't think about it. If someone stiff arms you, you've just made an adjustment. And so it was really interesting to me, because I'm like, I've never taught people how to deal with stiff arms, as an example, because it just sort of goes away. And I never had anyone teach me that. And that's one of those things of a position of privilege, or whatever you want to call it. Just doing judo so long that you forget that this was a challenge, because I'm 39 now, and that was a challenge when I was 9, right? So it sort of goes away. So I was just curious, sort of in that world, is there certain things that you still find, or challenges that you find for, like, oh, this is something that happens to children that maybe our high performance people don't deal with, that you re-examine sometimes, or gets brought up to your attention in some way?
Well, that example of the stiff arms thing. So as you get older and you're more competitive, that does go away, because people know that if they want to throw, they can't have stiff arms. They have to relax to apply the techniques. It's interesting, because our club model is built around skill. It's really, really important, and different directions, thrown to the back, thrown to the front, and off those couple of grips. But one of the problems, I mean, we talk to the players all the time about what's going to happen. We're discussing things constantly. So we'll say to them, the problem is going to be for you guys. You're going to have the most skill when you're in these matches, but the people who are going to fight are going to be quite a bit more aggressive and rough and pull you around, and they're not going to grip up the way that you grip up and practice in the club. They're not going to do nice judo. The younger kids, older, that's not a problem. So, but once they realise that, once you've chatted about it, and then they're in a match, you know, the younger kids, we don't coach the older kids, but we might coach the younger kids. So when it's a matty, we'll say to them, I told you the guy was going to pull you around, get that grip. So you've discussed it. And then once our guys get their hands on that inside lapel grip or shoulder grip right against left, because they've got the skills, if they're doing, like, say, for example, an Ouchi and an Uchimata, it doesn't take long for them to throw kids that are not used to getting thrown, because they're not being attacked by players who actually can throw at that age.
Right.
We will teach kids 5 years old Uchimata, and they will do it really, really well, and nobody will get hurt. The way that we do it is to do really good balance exercise with them first. Might be games involved where they've got to hold that Uchimata position. Then they've got to do a mirror thing with their partner where they've got to hold the position. Then they've got to hop in an Uchimata position, hop, stop, go into Nukemi. And then when we actually get to teaching the throw, we'll always do it off the shoulder or the neck. And then they'll first of all just come in and hold their partner's leg up in midair, not throw them.
Right.
And then eventually from there, they'll hold it and their partner will just gently roll off it. And then now you've got a 5-year-old kid that's used to standing on one leg and, you know, lifting up. So I think that people really underestimate what kids can do. You know, they'll do koshi and okoshi. Nothing wrong with those throws, but kids are capable of much more complex movement if they're preempted by games or exercises that lead to the throw.
Right.
But when we take a class for younger kids, well, for everybody, we write the program of what technique we're doing on that particular day, and then work back from that. So if we're doing Taitoshi, we'll do a warm-up for people's legs. We'll do stuff where you have to split legs. So lots of things and exercises and movements before they actually put their hands on someone to come in for the throw.
Right.
So we've been using that system for 20 years.
Right. To that same point, I guess, for throwing, do you utilize crash pads or anything like that, or are you just having them throw into tummy?
No, we just need to work on them having really good control when they throw,
right,
and not them throws that they. I think everybody's got a difference of opinion, but I think Gary is one of the hardest break falls, and yet lots of kids will try and do Sotogari, and they go back, their head comes back, and they bump. So we stick away from throws like that. If I'm doing a throw to it'll be Sinagi Kochigari when they sit in the bottom, or Ochigari again when they can sit in the bottom and they can roll them back until they develop their break fall skills.
Right. Yeah, I tell people that all the time. I think Osoto is the most efficient throw in judo, which means it is the hardest fall. You go from standing to immediately on your back, and where you fall is across your shoulders. If someone does it properly, you fall across your shoulders on this angle. I've never been thrown so hard as there was a gentleman that I'm sure you're aware of named Legion. He came to Montreal. He came to Montreal when I was about 21. And so for those that don't know, he's a 2-time Olympic champion, the first person ever to win the Olympic gold in 2 different weight classes. So he had come to Canada for the Rendezvous Canada, which used to be a very tough event. And he was backed by the US Open immediately after. And so we did a little training camp, and he decided to do Randori with me for whatever reason. I'm not sure, but he asked me to go. So we did Randori, and he threw me with an Osoto that to this day, I don't know how I survived. I've never been thrown so hard in my life. And it was brutal. Like the worst falls I've ever taken in my life are Osoto. Yeah.
It's funny. We had Yuki Nakamura he was Olympic champion. He was in Edinburgh at the end of his connections to Japan.
Right.
And I was taking the session, and I wanted Yuki to show Osotogari, because his Osotogari is amazing, right?
Right.
So just take me as a rookie.
Right.
He just stepped through with the first attack and absolutely annihilated me on the mat.
Right. Right.
So I got up and kind of pretended it was okay. It wasn't. So I said to him, did you see that, everybody? Then I said to him, could you show us how to do it? And I remember him coming through, and his chest was banging off my ear, power coming through. And you could see why that technique was so amazing, because of the dynamic explosion at the start. And he was the same as me. But it was like, the technique was incredible.
Right.
But the key point is, as you said, Osotogari is an extremely tough throw to be thrown with. Definitely.
Yeah, like one of the all-time legends of judo, Kimura, who trained Doug Rogers, Canada's first ever Olympic medal. He took a silver medal. He passed away, I think, a year ago from British Columbia, but he took a silver medal in the 1964 Olympics, and he trained Doug Rogers for a period of time. And Kimura, when you read these stories of this, I'll say madman in his training methodologies, is supposedly he knocked people unconscious, made people cough blood, broke ribs with throwing people with Osoto. Is the legends of this man. Is his Osoto was just so incredibly brutal. The other thing that's interesting is how much you throw. I'm a big advocate personally of having people not just perform uchikomi, but a lot of nagikomi, so that we don't learn to physiologically as well as psychologically stop in the middle of a technique. Because if we do only uchikomi or huge amounts of uchikomi, we're learning physically with our muscles and also our brain that we should stop. And we have a lot of people that enter beautifully for technique, and then there's a hold. And I remember another fantastic Olympic champion, Ilias Iliadis. He came to Canada, and he was doing a training camp in Montreal, and he was teaching his Ogoshi Koshiguruma, his style, and he was teaching the technique. And every time he did it, he threw and rolled through on the throw. And one coach said, "Can you show that as an uchikomi?" And he refused. He refused to even show it as an uchikomi, because he's like, "No, I have to fully commit every time I do this technique." And I thought that was like a very interesting thing, that he would not even perform it as an uchikomi. So hearing how much you throw and how important that is something that I would agree is a very powerful tool.
There's a big debate around uchikomi, isn't there? Pros and cons of uchikomi. What I think about uchikomi is that I think it provides the first movement and the rotation and the position of your body. And I think that you have to get that right before you can throw.
Yep.
I think that that there should be, as a part of the development process, let's say Uchikomi, and then, for example, dynamic lines, and then finally throwing, right? And there should be Uchikomi. But I think that the key thing is the quality and the dynamic movement in Uchikomi. So many people do Uchikomi, they just kind of turn in. It's almost, it's not even relative to Judo. So even the movement where you just pull the hands up, you know, I can see the point of that. But when we're doing Uchikomi in the club, it's just the way that we do it. It's a full-blooded Uchimata Uchikomi. It's a full-blooded Shinagi, almost at the point of throwing them every time. So it's completely, once they have the movement, completely dynamic.
Right.
And then the line movement, for example, when you're getting the, you know, when to throw. So one of the times when to throw in a Shinagi, that second that somebody steps forward, you know, like a slight movement forward and you go underneath them. So again, in the line, you can get to feel that. You know, so there it is. So it's static, and then completely set up in a line and throwing every time, and then it's moving around and feeling it. And so it's stages of that. But I can also see Craig Fallon, for example, did very little Uchikomi, lots and lots of just throwing. So I think it's for courses, and I think it's a mistake to say there's one way to do it. I think there's lots of ways to do it, and you pick and choose what you think works for you.
Yeah. I think finding your model of approach, like the model that you're going to utilize, is important, and to stay with, to some degree at least, to sort of stay with it, to see where it is, like to finding out, to understand if something does well is sample size of data. So if we only do something periodically or in small amounts for a short period of time, and you don't give it a chance to go somewhere, you don't have an objective answer as to how it's going. You need to do something long enough to see how that is going. And I agree, that, what do they say? A lot of ways to skin a cat. It's sort of finding your method and your model of how that makes sense to you. And so, I'm not against using Uchikomi, and I think it's the first part of a technique. I just found from my experience that if I limit to that a large amount, and especially to your point, if I don't focus on the quality of that entry, then all we're doing is a physical body movement, which helps your VO2 max or whatever, but it's not really helping your judo development.
Craig Fallon was a fantastic judo player. And it was Craig that took John's Olympic place off him. He came in and he took that place off him. And John and Craig used to go to training camps, let's say, in Japan. And so John, Craig was an extremely hard trainer, but in a different way. Right? John Buchanan, just like an incredible trainer, never missed. He's like one of those guys. That's his makeup. But Craig would go onto the mat and let's say we'd do 2 or 3 practices, and he would just say, "I'm not doing any more." Why? Because I'm just not feeling it today.
Right.
It doesn't work for him. So he's thinking about his judo and how it is. And then we come on the next day, we do all the practice. So it's a complete contrast in styles of players, but both fantastic judo players, both with completely different systems for their objective. And I think that's what I'm getting to more and more, that it's so many ways to achieve what you want to achieve. And as a coach, you've got to give your players, your job is to make yourself redundant, actually, if it's your performance coach. You've got to give your player all the tools and information that they're making all the decisions. All you're doing is carrying their bag to the venue and a water bottle. If you're doing your job properly, you make yourself redundant.
Right. And back to the very start of our conversation as well is one thing that everyone in judo knows is the pillars, maximum efficiency, from judo, from Jigoro Kano. So to me, the one thing that crosses my mind, where you talk about how you're not wasting time from small children up to high performance, is about finding a way that everything is judo specific. So we're always doing those things. And I think about it to that sense, it becomes in some ways more important the more advanced someone is we're limited to how much time these people can be on the mats because of life and schedules. And then on top of that, we're limited on what someone can physically do. So yes, I could technically have you at judo for 6 hours a day, right? But I can't, because your body can only sustain so much work and it can only be broken down so much. So I think what I sort of try to think about is back to that reference of Kano, is how can I be as efficient with my time as possible? Because I only have you so much and you can only work so hard. And if I'm wasting that energy doing something that's not beneficial in the near term, or however you want to put it, then that's wasted energy that I can't get back.
Yeah. It's the time that you just said it, so again, I'm not criticizing anybody else's session. Everybody's got logic, but
right.
For example, we'll take 15 minutes at the end of a session and do sprints. Well, that's
right.
3 rounds. Well, that's like
right.
how many nagi komis?
Right.
So you go and sprint in the park, but it's my opinion. It's about, and this is why your session planning is going to be really good. That you're really taking. This is what did I do last week? How does that work? What did we do 2 weeks ago? What's our goal? We're talking a lot now about kind of performance and talent development, but we're on that road. So if it's talent development, the goal for our guys is the British Championships. So everything at the end of the year in December. So every single thing we're doing, every single session right now is leading to the British Championships.
Right.
And the kids who will compete in that, so we're at this moment in time, they're out of the competitive phase, so we're really focusing on these styles that I talked to you about. The sessions are pretty low key, they're not hard work, lots and lots of throwing, lots of working things out. And as they come nearer the tournaments, with a couple of, if you like, test tournaments before it, they will tempo. By the time we come to the last 6 weeks, it doesn't look anything like what we're doing now. It's grip, it's fighting, still lots of that, more time on the mat, more weekend camps, lots of we'll have a camp, we'll just do Newaza all weekend. So by the time we finish on Sunday night, their Newaza will have taken a step forward.
Right.
So all that's built into that one tournament. So right now it's technical development, but 6 weeks before it's all out war.
Right. And the thing where it's interesting to me, or where that connection is, is I think about, for instance, when you make the reference of when you do randori, you don't separate the two. So as we know, as lifetime judoka, so many times that people are caught in newaza is during the transition. This is the most opportune time. So when you have children learning that as their regular pattern of behavior, them transitioning to newaza becomes an automatic thing later in life when they're a high performance judoka. And that's why it's sort of, the two conversations are totally separate and not, because that behavior becomes their way of doing judo for their whole lives. And so that's it's an interesting thing. I often break my newaza down into very specific segments of a position we regularly get to. And then that way, yes, it's taught separate, but it's really specific. One person starts in the turtle. They're not facing each other on their knees, as an example. Or one person's in a half guard with the leg trapped, and we're working from that position so that they work from positions that occur. So that becomes like the natural progression. But it's interesting in that way of preparing those things for them to do it naturally later. And the other thing that I think about to that same area is when I used to do judo, this is a knock, is I used to train a lot and I'd work on my techniques, and then I would do randori, and you sort of do randori that judo will happen. And since, again, a reference to comparing to other sports, is I think of American football. American football is 15-second intervals. Well, judo is actually 18 to 20-second intervals. And what they do in American football is they have a play, blue 62, and that's a wide receiver runs this way, and this guy goes this way, and everybody has their thing that they have to do, and they perform the play, and then they adjust, was it successful or not? And I think about, in terms of your 4 different stances that you go from, your 4 different grips or whatever you have it, based on your opponent, is you're creating plays in a sense. So when I do judo, I don't just do judo. I do judo with the idea, this is what I'm doing. This is my interval. It's for 18 seconds. If that doesn't work, then it's an adjustment. And that, I find, when you put that into people's hands in terms of game plan, whether it's a conversation or in terms of a gripping strategy, that then you get to know, was it successful or not? You make an adjustment, you do it again, and you're doing judo with a lot more purpose, which I think is a very efficient way to do things.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's tweaking. For example, if it's left against right and you can get a shoulder grip you throw every time with Chimata, that's great. But what happens the day that you don't get the guy who gives you that grip?
Right.
What you're then going to do, and that's why you have to have options too. But you'll probably have a gripping style or set of techniques that works perfectly for you. But you have to do that. We've got a really good boy at a club called Luke Thompson. He's won the British 3 times in the trot. He's 17 now. His mum's Canadian, and he's a member of Lethbridge Judo Club,
right.
And he's taken out Canadian citizenship,
right.
And he competed, I think, is it Edmonton before the pandemic?
Edmonton International, yeah, it's a very big tournament in Alberta. Yeah,
so he's done that, but he's going to fight for Canada,
right?
And yeah, this kid's really good. He's
right.
Really good, very, very smart, technically great, strong. Yeah, we talked about Ian and John, who I love to bits, but in terms of potential right now, Luke is for the forward. His strategy, we've had these meetings, it's happening. His mum and dad are smart people, sports people. Dad's South African, mum's Canadian. So the plan is that he will be in Tokai for 4 years, but he will be for Canada, and that will be coming down the track in the next. Now it's happening. The process has already started.
Right.
He's in the British team. He's number 1 in Great Britain, but he can't fight for Great Britain in a tournament because he won't be able to fight for Canada.
Right.
So that's the way the strategies in our club are going. We're okay, this kid, and the reason he wants to fight for Canada at the moment, I think that the Canadian high performance program is really good, and we've discussed it, and he's keen to do that. So yeah, remember that name is Luke. His name's Luke. It won't be long till he's over there.
Yeah, it's there's 2 parts of that are exciting. I mean, Tokai is the place. I mean, that's like in the judo world, there's not too many places that are more highly spoken of than the development of judoka. People have come through the door of Tokai, and what they've done is pretty amazing. And then the other part is like understanding a little bit that you have, not only that you have a systematic approach in how you develop, but you're creating a systematic approach by your athletes. And where I find that interesting, or that I love, is one of my favorite judoka in the world to watch is Sagi Muki. So for those that don't know, Sagi Muki is a world champion at 81 kilograms. He's from Israel. And when you watch him fight, he does things, it's almost robotic. I do this, which leads to this, which leads to this, which often is a Sode grip do Soto or a Sode Surikomigoshi. And he has just unbelievable highlight reel throws, and obviously a world-class judoka. But what I love is I can watch him and I know he's not just playing. This is my approach to how I do judo. And he makes variances and adjustments, but it's so systematic, and you see how he performs that way. So seeing that you're building that in athletes on a regular basis makes a lot of sense as to why you have a huge group that feel competitive, that are competitive, that then go to the competitive level, but also can perform at a very high level, because they're not just playing judo. They're playing judo with a game plan going in, with strong fundamentals, and engaged in it with coaches that are very much enthusiastic about producing them as adults and men and women and athletes.
I think the important thing, the conversations went pretty much to sort of talent development and performance stuff, right? And only a very small, tiny proportion get through. But I think that the job as a coach is to give your players opportunities, and whether they take those opportunities or not is completely up to them. And as a coach coming through working with kids that are 5 years old, the process of giving them the tools that we'll need if they should decide to be a high performance player, that's the key thing. And I think that that's really, really undervalued. The space between a 5-year-old till 16 before, let's say, they go into the program. Your job, what you do, the mindset that you create, the work ethos that you create, the positive people you create, and the technical input, that's what gets them there. Without, because most people listen to this will not be high performance coaches, right. They will be club coaches, but the tools and the foundation that you can give them to move forward is everything. And without that foundation, the next part doesn't happen.
Right.
It's important. And when coaches coach for different reasons. The thing that I like is the connection to people and developing people. I love that. I also like that, but that's a byproduct. But when a player wins, and that you're a part of that journey, it's very satisfying. You might not have been there the day that they won the Olympic gold, and it might have been the high performance program that took them there in the end. But knowing that you had a really important part of that journey, and that you affected that person's life and changed their life completely with the things that you did. Well, that's brilliant, and it's not a responsibility, but in some ways it is, And so any coach that I are watching this and don't work at high level, please don't underestimate that without you, nothing happens.
Right.
And without their mum and dad driving them there, and that club coach, none of the Olympic, this, that, and the next thing happens.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good note to end on is that I think, yeah, it's that connection, and what you find too is if people are younger into coaching, is those connections don't get forgotten. Some of the best connections I've made are with some kids that never performed at any level. When you watch a child struggle to do a somersault for a couple years, or a Zempo Kaiten Yukeme, and they get it, there's genuine pride from your side in there, because they may never be an Olympic athlete, but you helped better their life. And that's a powerful thing as well.
That's the absolute thing. I mean, our actual strapline for the club is judo makes people, judo builds people. This is exactly right. That is the one. Whether they become a performance player or don't, what you can do to influence and improve their life, that's massive. And that's not some PC line. That's right. That's what we do every day at the club.
Right. Right. Well, I had a fantastic time talking with you as always, and I hopefully we get to do it again soon. And congratulations on your 20-year anniversary.
Let's see. Look after yourself. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.